Speaker, sports holds a special place in the heart of a community. Pride and competition, skills, dedication, and leadership. Even homegrown heroes are all born of local sport programs. As in the case of all communities, this is all made possible by dedicated and passionate volunteers. Today, Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize a special volunteer who is a champion of East Hand sports heritage, as well as recognition of all of those who make local athletics possible. Mr. Cody Blois successfully incorporated the East Hand Sports Heritage Society in October of 2013. The Society honours past and present athletes, coaches, and volunteers in their contribution to our sports legacy. From Olympic athletes and hockey stars, inspiring coaches, and those who made sure that the ice was right and the rink lights were on. The Society, under the leadership of Mr. Blois, is preparing for the 3rd annual East Hand Sports Awards to be held May 7th at the Riverside Education Centre. This is a wonderful event and is an inspiration to all. Mr. Speaker, I extend the thanks of our community, Mr. Blois, for his ongoing...
Order, please. Time allotted for member statements has expired. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. You know, Mr. Speaker, every day it seems like there is more news about how bad the Yarmouth ferry deal is for the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. A few days ago, we learned there were 9 blackout days during the sailing season. Yesterday, we learned that Nova Scotia taxpayers are going to pay for terminal upgrades in Portland, Maine. Mr. Speaker, our tax dollars going to upgrade the terminal in Portland. I would just like to ask the Premier, why does he believe it's okay for Nova Scotia taxpayers to pay to upgrade the terminal in Portland, Maine?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I also want to thank Mr. Speaker Bay Ferries. We've been working diligently with the Department of TIR to ensure that that international link is here to continue to bring tourists. We're excited about the growth we had last year in the tourism season. We're looking forward to an even better season. I want to thank all those small businesses, particularly across southwestern Nova Scotia, but indeed across the province, who stayed with us through those lean years when that ferry was not running. And I want to thank them for their commitment to continuing to show their appreciation to the government to ensure that that service is still going.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Portland was very quick to approve their deal because, of course, they don't have to pay a cent, but they're going to get an upgraded downtown terminal, Mr. Speaker, and, of course, the benefits of the ferry for nothing. But it's going to cost Nova Scotia taxpayers at least $100 million, probably more, including our money going to upgrade the terminal in the city of Portland, Maine, Mr. Speaker. That is an expense that is going to infuriate those Nova Scotians who think they went way too far. So I hope the Premier knows how much the terminal upgrade cost is, since we're going to pay for it. So I'll ask him, how much of our tax money is going to go to upgrade the terminal in Portland, Maine?
The Honourable Premier.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. He, again, Mr. Speaker, is simply wrong when he throws around the $100 million figure. I know it helps his story. It helps him to create fear amongst people in the province. But the actual reality is, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the province has a jump-off point in year 2. We've actually have very conservative numbers.
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, we thank you very much. I want to thank the Honourable Member. He knows that the $100 million figure he's throwing around is absolutely wrong. Mr. Speaker, we have a 2-year jump-off point. Still working with our developer to make sure that we continue to grow on those conservative numbers that we have in terms of ridership. Looking forward to continuing to welcome more people, Mr. Speaker. And I'm looking forward to get out and continue to walk around communities where the optimistic Nova Scotians are living, Mr. Speaker, as opposed to the pessimists that are on the other side of the House.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that deal is going to cost Nova Scotians at least $100 million. At least $100 million. Everyone knows it. And every day it gets more and more, Mr. Speaker. What Nova Scotians are fearful of is they have a Premier that was willing to sign a blank check for that boat without any regard to our ability to pay. That's what's fearful for the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and that it just goes on and on. Every day there's something new. So I'll ask the Premier, is there any limit to the taxpayer expense that he has committed Nova Scotia to?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question again. I want to thank all those hardworking Nova Scotians working with this government. I told the leader of the Conservative Party many times that this proposal has a 2-year review point, the jump-off point at any time. But I also want to tell the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, the business community that I talked to, the men and women who were downstairs at the announcement about our investment in young people, are optimistic about the future, Mr. Speaker. More young people are finding opportunities in the province of Nova Scotia. They're excited about our future. Business confidence is high, Mr. Speaker. Population is growing, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing all kinds of positive
Order,
signs.
please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to see all kinds of positive signs. I know it doesn't help their story, but the reality is, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are looking forward and leaving their pessimism behind.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, increasing wait times for health services in Nova Scotia over the last 2.5 years is cause for serious concern. Meanwhile, this government has been focused on amalgamating the health authorities and agitating with healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians expect more from their government when it comes to the delivery of health care in this province. So I ask the Premier, why has this government not prioritized addressing increased wait times for health services in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I want to thank all those healthcare workers across the province who have been working with our government to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we have a single system across the province, that wherever you access point you can receive, no matter what community you live in, is a positive thing. As the honourable member would know, there are wait times. I think 5,000 new surgeries we did for hips and knees this year in our province. We're continuing to work with the people of the province, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister of Health for the work that he's been doing on behalf of the people of the province, Mr. Speaker. And I say to you, as I travel this province, Mr. Speaker, healthcare workers are grateful for the direction this province is moving.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, wait times for hip replacement in Nova Scotia highlight a need for attention. A government graph depicting wait times for hip replacement surgery shows that in the months following the amalgamation of the health authorities, wait times increased by over 300 days, and I'll table that. So I ask the Premier, can he explain why wait times for hip replacements in Nova Scotia soared by more than 75% in the months following the amalgamation of the health authority?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll ask the Minister of Health to respond.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I guess the NDP caucus would know, that what happened was that we changed to a true wait period from the time that a patient comes in to a doctor in terms of their hips and knees, as opposed to the number of days after a surgeon says you will be scheduled for surgery. So we have the entire period of time meeting the national standard, so that our benchmarks now can reflect a true wait period. It had nothing to do whatsoever with the amalgamation of the health authority, and this year we will do over 500 hips and knee surgeries in the province, at the same time reducing MRIs by 12% across Nova Scotia, and the news will get better if I get more time to respond.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Institute for Health Information posts benchmarks for treatment and wait times across Canada. Sadly, Nova Scotia is dead last in the country for hip replacements, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, with an aging population, there is a serious potential for this situation to worsen. I ask the Premier, what is the government's plan to address Nova Scotia's position as last in the country for meeting hip replacement benchmarks?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. It gives me an opportunity to talk about the great work the Minister of Health has been doing. Is about tearing down walls across our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker. Orthopedic surgeons across this province are coming together to collaborate to deal with the challenges facing Nova Scotians requiring hips and knees. Mr. Speaker, we know there's more work to do. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, there are people out there that want to work with government to find solutions to deal with the issues that Nova Scotians are having.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, a Cape Breton father, Ernest LeBlanc, lost his son Jason while his son was in the custody of a provincial jail. Mr. LeBlanc has been unable to find out how or why his son died while in provincial custody. In addition to dealing with his unimaginable loss, Mr. Speaker, Mr. LeBlanc is haunted by the idea that he doesn't even know what happened. I'd like to ask the Minister of Justice, will she provide some peace to Mr. LeBlanc today and share with him the cause of his son's death while he was in provincial custody?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I really appreciate the question that you've raised. It's always a tragedy when we lose any Nova Scotian under any circumstance, but the questions that arise, losing somebody in custody, certainly I know leave the family with a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. I'd like to certainly give my deepest sympathies to the family and let the family know as well that this has had a big impact, a profound impact really on the correctional staff as well. They take their roles very seriously. In answer to the member's question, we certainly have an investigation underway within Correction Services, and the police as well are investigating. So perhaps I can provide more in a second question.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that answer. There is an internal investigation going on, Mr. Speaker. Questions have been raised about what happened that awful day to Jason while he was in the custody of the provincial correctional system. Mr. Speaker, that investigation hopefully will provide the answers that Ernest LeBlanc and his family need to have for their own peace of mind. I would like to ask the Minister of Justice, will she commit that the results of that internal investigation will be shared with Ernest LeBlanc and his family as soon as they are available?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, we have been keeping in touch with the family. I understand our Director of Corrections has been in touch with the family right along. It does take some time to get the results. What I will commit to the family and to the member opposite and asking is that when the results are available, we'll release whatever we can to them personally and sit down with them. We always post a more high-level synopsis of the findings, which are made public, but there are often some aspects we can't, for example, if there's personal information or security risks that might be revealed from that. But we will release whatever we can in a meeting with the family. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wait times for community-based mental health services are on the rise. This is deeply concerning because the Minister and the Nova Scotia Health Authority are both directing people to this exact same care. The Minister has claimed time and time again in this House that mental health services are better today than they were a year ago. But just ask the people who are suffering, those who find themselves waiting to see a healthcare professional, or even worse, families like the Glodes in Millbrook First Nation whose loved one, Cody, tragically just couldn't wait any longer. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister please detail specific actions he's taking to take care of mental health wait times?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, we had here in the House an explanation yesterday in estimates on the number of clinicians, psychologists now in our schools that were never there before. And we all know that starting out with our youth to provide more direct professional services through the 20 clinicians that are working with our families of schools, the School Plus program, the work that is doing. We've expanded that program every year in our budget as people who've gone toward a Garand Centre at the IWK know that we are at the lowest level of wait list in many years for adolescent services.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I didn't really hear an answer in that response because the Minister seems to ignore that in the past 2 years, community-based mental health wait times have increased by 25% under his leadership. I'll table that graph. In an op-ed penned by the minister himself, he asserts that most people benefit from outpatient or community treatment. Mr. Speaker, if the minister truly wants to stand behind these claims, he must explain to the people in my riding, in Pictou County and across Nova Scotia why it is that our wait lists are growing. So, Mr. Speaker, how can the minister justify encouraging families and individuals to access community-based mental health services while the wait list just continues to grow?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly to me to provide the full provincial picture. We can look at a particular county or area of the province and absolutely find that we still have to build capacity. I look at the South Shore, for example, where the wait list has been eliminated. We are moving those best practices across the province, and I know that we are making gains every month under this provincial approach, and I would suggest the member opposite also work with updated statistics.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of TIR. Mr. Speaker, the government paid almost $900,000 for a study looking at the possibility of 28 sections of highway across Nova Scotia. And that study was supposed to be completed by the end of April, and I'll table that. My question for the Minister, could the Minister confirm that the study is complete, and will he make the study public and table it during this sitting of the Legislature?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. With respect to this study, we're working with the consultants on the final details of the financial modelling, which is the second phase of the very comprehensive study, with the first being the overall infrastructure modelling and what the corridors would look like. We are in the final details of that, so the consultants are back getting that work complete, so that we can keep on schedule to get into the communities. We have 12 meetings identified across the province to get into communities and talk to people directly. We're hoping to kick them off by mid-May and have them fully completed by the end of June. So we're still on schedule for that. At that time is when all the information will be presented to Nova Scotians, and we certainly look forward to having their say and getting opinions on all sides. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for his answer. Mr. Speaker, the findings of the studies would be very important for helping Nova Scotians understand what is at stake. I understand that the Minister wants to hit the road, and he just confirmed that in mid-May. Consultation will be much more meaningful, sir, if all the information is on the table. So my question is, will the Minister confirm that the study and any other reports not kind of a day. Will any other reports be made publicly available before consultations begin?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite, and I couldn't agree more. The fact that we're going to be fully engaged and participating at the community level, myself and the senior people at my department, to get this right. The information is critical, so for us, the more we can provide the Nova Scotians on both sides of the conversation, the better. So with all the reports that are being compiled with respect to what we have now with the current consulting work and anything else we can provide when we're finished this process, as we set out to do from the beginning, it's about getting a full and accurate reflection and understanding of what the people who put us here want us to do with respect to our our twin highways and the toll options moving forward. So all information will be presented. We'll give people every single shred of data, material, evidence that we have, and then ultimately we'll let Nova Scotians guide our path. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for the answer. But we're going to change directions a little bit in this question, Mr. Speaker. In February, media reports said that the Minister of Transportation said that the Bluenose 2 had been given a clean bill of health. And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. We know absolutely, definitely, there's nothing short-term we have to worry about, said the Minister. So my question to the Minister of Transportation is, who gave the boat a clean bill of health? And will you table that document?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member opposite. The vessel was given a clean bill of health by way of the consultant's report that was issued from our government. The future, the issue of the rudder is about the long-term viability of the vessel and the stability. So to prevent any premature hogging of the vessel, the report recommends that we replace the steel rudder with a wooden or composite rudder, which is the work being done by those very same consultants at this point. So the vessel is safe and secure with the steel rudder on. We'll have a tremendous season in 2016. There's no safety or mobility concerns at this point. This decision was made entirely about the long-term future and stability of the Bluenose. We'll get that rudder right once and for all, and we'll have her out at sea for all Nova Scotians and all the world to enjoy. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that was a great answer. But it still didn't tell us who did the report, and he didn't tell us if he was going to table it. But I'm sure he'll get around to that in this answer. Mr. Speaker, last year at Public Accounts, we learned the Lloyd's Registry would not take on the Bluenose 2 certification, and the government had then chosen the American Bureau of Shipping. ABS asked for the steel rudder to be installed. The steel rudder is now going to be replaced with a wood, rubber, or one made of glass composite with a carbon stock. So my question to the Minister is, has the Bluenose 2 been certified, and by which organization this time? And it would be really nice to know who did or didn't do the...
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just for clarification, ABS at no point indicated that this had to be a steel rudder. There were a number of options that were presented, and the steel option was okay and acceptable for ABS. But in fact, it wasn't ABS that were forcing a steel rudder. Again, the steel rudder resulted in the entire decision-making process that started way back in 2008, and with the lack of oversight, project management, that's why we ended up with a steel rudder. It certainly wasn't at the request of ABS. So again, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the rudder, the consultant's report, there would be no reason why we can't table that. So everything we've done has been upfront and open and accountable. We want to make sure that Nova Scotians have the full picture on how we got here, and we certainly want the Bluenose 2 to be safe for the future and the long-term health of the...
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal government has made it clear to seniors in Nova Scotia that they're not committed or concerned about the long-term care system that we have in place. Since this government came into office, wait lists for nursing home placements have risen by over 23%. The government has ignored our province's long-term care system for more than 2.5 years, and the outcome of this is that seniors and their families are waiting longer and longer for care they need. Mr. Speaker, how can the minister justify a 23% increase in long-term care wait lists under his government?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. The day that he left office, the wait list was almost 2,600 seniors waiting to get in. Today, it is almost touching 1,400.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
That's easy to do with an eraser, Mr. Speaker. The minister's answer does nothing for seniors and families who are waiting for long-term care. Across this province, wait times for long-term care are staggering. In Cape Breton, on average, seniors are forced to wait 608 days, and in some facilities, 901 days. In Richmond, Mr. Speaker, Richmond, seniors are being forced to wait an astonishing 1,088 days. 1 week shy of 3 years, Mr. Speaker. What does the minister have to say to seniors and their families who are waiting for placements in long-term care, some of them almost up to 3 years?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I can say is that under the previous government, the list stagnated at 2,500, 4.5 years. We've brought it down by 1,000 on the list, and the list is getting shorter every day. I gave the leader...
The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
Today for Cumberland County, there was only one either long-term care, nursing home, or alternate that had any number over 5 people on the wait list.
The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley. please. Order, please. The honourable member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My speaker is my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Yesterday, the CBC reported that the Department of Community Services had suspended the hair strand drug and alcohol testing in child protection cases. 3 other provinces stopped using the tests altogether. In March, at the Standing Committee on Community Services, the Deputy Minister said Nova Scotia was continuing to use hair strand tests, but sending them to another lab. The testing continued even though in January a Supreme Court of Nova Scotia Family Division judge said testing at both labs was reliable. So what made the Minister change her mind on strand testing?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, and I thank the member for that question. It's a very important question because anything that has to do with the protection of children in Nova Scotia is always a priority for any government. The decision to suspend and end the hair strand testing was made after more science and more questions around the science came to light between then, when the deputy spoke at the Public Accounts Committee, and now. I just like to make it clear that hair strand testing is just one tool in the toolbox that is used to determine whether or not a child comes into the care of the province. It is never, and I have to emphasize this, never the lone reason why a child would be taken into care. There are other mitigating circumstances around that decision, but we will no longer be using hair strand testing in Nova Scotia for the foreseeable future.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 300 people in Nova Scotia receive positive hair strand drug or alcohol tests that may not be accurate. Until now, the department has only retested samples if a person requests that. The question is, given that hair strand testing will no longer be done, how does the department intend to deal with the past positive samples?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, and again, I thank the member for that question. There has been one case that has come forward and asked for a review, and that has not made a difference in the decision that was made by the judge. As I reiterated previously, hair strand testing in no way, shape, or form is the only indicator of why a child will be taken into care. We will rely on the great social work practices that we have and the other ways that we can certainly test in Nova Scotia for drug analysis. If anybody in those 300 cases have any concerns about the decision, they can certainly come forward and we will do an investigation into their individual case.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Business. Mr. Speaker, in many areas across the province, tourism operators include a marketing levy on accommodations that goes towards tourism promotion. It is rumoured, Mr. Speaker, that the government intends to impose such a fee province-wide. My question for the Minister of Business, who has responsibility for tourism, is this. If it goes forward, would Tourism Nova Scotia collect and use all the revenue from these fees, or would it still be allocated to the region it is collected in?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, the opposition is basing their questions on rumours. There's no such work on the part of government to apply a levy in these circumstances, Mr. Speaker. There are existing levies within different municipalities. There are municipalities who have talked about levies and chose not to advance them. Our position is quite simple, Mr. Speaker. If there's a need for a levy, the industry will lead. We'll wait for the industry, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll take it that the minister says no, that rumour is not true then, that the province is not going to do it. Mr. Speaker, my second question for the minister is this. These marketing fees are based on the size of the business, and in this day and age we see more and more small operators springing up, such as Airbnbs. Does the minister have any plans to accommodate enterprises like this into these types of levies?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
I'm not sure what my colleague didn't hear, Mr. Speaker, but this government is not going to base their work on rumours, that's for sure. Specific Specific to the shared economy and my colleague's reference to Airbnb, I've communicated both in this House and externally, Mr. Speaker, that the Office of Regulatory Affairs and Service Effectiveness have seconded a resource from their office to Tourism Nova Scotia. They're working on and reviewing all of the components of the shared economy. But safe to say, Mr. Speaker, the shared economy is here to stay. The industry recognizes that. And it's time that we give it a true analysis and to determine how we can manage that within the existing environment and reap as many benefits as we possibly can for all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's not just seniors waiting for long-term care, Mr. Speaker. Under the Minister of Health in this government, people are waiting longer for health care they desperately need. According to a recent CBC story, Nova Scotia home care wait list is up over 50% in the past 2 years. Since the government put a moratorium on long-term care, new long-term care homes, more and more seniors are depending or need to depend on home care services. What is the minister doing, and what is the government doing to address the growing wait times we see for seniors and people to access home care services?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's another good news story to tell Nova Scotians. Having just eliminated the wait list for home care in Cumberland County, Pictou County, we have now the lowest wait list in the Annapolis Valley in a decade, getting down to about 100 people needing home care. I can give him the exact number of hours if he requires that, but I would suggest maybe he could FOI-pop my office before asking a question.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
It might be funny, but the people who are waiting on home care, Mr. Speaker, aren't laughing. And the reason we have to FOI-pop is because the minister and the government doesn't give any information, Mr. Speaker. They hide almost everything in government, Mr. Speaker, not the transparent government they promised to be, Mr. Speaker. Seniors are waiting for home care. He likes to cherry-pick a few of the areas, Mr. Speaker, but there are many, many seniors waiting for home care, and that answer won't help them at all, Mr. Speaker. What is he doing to address the wait times for home care here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I think the member does realize an area that his government never, ever approached to improve. We've made dramatic improvements, $55 million, Mr. Speaker, we've invested since starting in 2013. Wait lists are coming down every month. They will continue to come down. The new contracts will have deliverables. Home care is in a very good state in this province.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Health. In general, the health care in Nova Scotia is in a crisis, but particularly mental health. Mr. Speaker, Pictou County has a population of 46,000 people with 1.8 psychiatrists, and in Truro we have a population of 67,000 with 8 to 9 psychiatrists. Does the Minister believe this ratio is fair when addressing the mental health crisis in Pictou County? A yes or no answer will do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can say today, and people of Pictou County are realizing, is that they have very strong community-based mental health services, that creating those hubs of expertise is what is taking place under the leadership of Dr. Corey, and people of Pictou County who need mental health are getting mental health support.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, Linda Curry, Senior Director of Mental Health, stated in an article which I will table that the shuttered unit's fate won't be known until more province-wide decisions are made about providing mental health care. What we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that financial resources have been taken away from the Aberdeen Hospital to cover the cost of increasing beds from 10 to 14 at the Truro Hospital. When the minister and his department finally decides the fate and what health care model they'll use to implement at the Aberdeen Hospital, Will he also ensure the financial resources that were taken away be redirected back to the Aberdeen Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that was a perfect lead-in because as the new ER is developed at Pictou, there will be 2 beds dedicated totally to those who come in some kind of mental health trauma or crisis, and that certainly is an improved service over putting somebody in a room for 6 months without psychiatric care.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health as well. People all over the province are struggling with mental health care, Mr. Speaker. The people of Cape Breton have spoken up about the need for a 24-hour mobile mental health crisis team. The charge is being led by Brenda Lee MacDonald, a mother who tragically lost her son who had been struggling with mental illness. Mrs. MacDonald started a petition and now has more than 1,200 signatures. Mrs. MacDonald has presented the petition to the Minister of Health, and now the people of Cape Breton are waiting for an update. So my question to the Minister, can the Minister provide an update on the status of creating a mobile mental health crisis team for the people of Cape Breton?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a service that I know has made a tremendous difference here in HRM to have a mobile crisis team that is available 24/7, 365 days a year. I know that the Health Authority is looking at how services can be improved, those of an emergency nature, and as soon as that report and that information is available, I'll certainly make it known to the member and to all the people of Cape Breton.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, they have a mobile CEC in Waterford. I'm just wondering if that could be helped to adapt to the mental health crisis. The Minister has said that he has spoken with the Health Authority about the proposal as they deal with service delivery. The Minister, however, is in charge of all health services and provides the budget to the Provincial Health Authority. So my question to the Minister was funding for a mobile mental health crisis team included in this year's budget for the people of Cape Breton.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We know that one crisis that leads to any kind of tragic circumstances is certainly one too many. I know that across the province now, having a crisis line available to Nova Scotians is certainly a first entry point. And I know that a unit for Cape Breton is being investigated, and that work will continue. Certainly the mobile CEC, whether or not people can be trained to be part of that unit, I like the suggestion the member has brought forward.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Access to gynecological services is extremely important to the women of this province. In the fall, our caucus tabled a briefing note prepared for the Minister that stated surgical wait times in gynecology has increased by 20% in the last 2 years. When asked about this by my colleague a few days ago, the Minister could only state that they are now able to move residents from one part of the province to another for service. So my question, I ask the Minister again, what is being done to address the increased wait times for women's gynecological services in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we implement a provincial approach to many of our services, making sure that in our regional hospitals we have the availability of ops-gynae specialists to carry out that work. At the present time, we are still recruiting for another 1 or 2. The complement for the province, based on the population that require this service, we in fact have met those services and requirements during the past year.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, having patients travel great distances to receive health care services on their own dime seems to be a part of this government's health care strategy. So yesterday we found that not only are sexual assault victims being forced to travel long distances to see special nurses, but women may need to move around the province to see a gynecologist. So my question for the minister is, how far will women have to be expected to travel to receive gynecological services in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In reference to the sane programs that are being developed across the province, what I can tell the member opposite, unlike the picture she's trying to portray, those leaders in the communities who will take this on, they are excited about, for the first time, a government that is developing a provincial plan, and we will finally have services available at many sites across Nova Scotia, and what I hear from women who require those services, they want to be getting the care from our top specialists, if it is a little bit of a distance away.
The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Same one you ripped the contract up with, isn't it? Yeah, they really enjoy the government.
You didn't do anything.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My pleasure to stand a few moments and speak about something very important in my constituency. And last summer, the Minister of Health had the opportunity to visit my constituency, where he met with an interested group of individuals of bringing a dialysis unit to the Barrington area. At that time, I would have thought that the minister was pretty open to the ideas. Unfortunately, the letter did come that they did get turned down. But I can also say to the minister, they were ready to do some fundraising, and they would have actually paid for the majority of that as well. So I'm just wondering where the minister is in dialysis services or dialysis units in small areas like Barrington Passage.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much. And I would correct the member from Barrington Argyll just a little bit. The people that met with me weren't just interested, they were passionate about what they wanted for their community. Since then, the Premier and I have met with the renal dialysis program, and I know that the smaller satellite communities have not been given strong attention. The Premier and I have now directed the program to take a second look at a number of small sites across the province to see whether or not they could support that service.
The Honourable Member for Argyll-Barrington.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. But I can also say to the minister is that many of the individuals that are receiving this life-saving service might not be around if we continue to wait and think and study and all the things. So I'm just wondering, when would the minister think that we would have a decision on how satellite dialysis units would work, especially for the individuals, the great people of Argyll-Barrington, the people in Woods Harbor, the people in Cape Island, so that they could receive the service so much closer to home.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the member probably knows now, that there are the experts in this program that now go to Yarmouth to do education on home dialysis, as opposed to having people come into Halifax to the renal program. I know that's certainly a step in the right direction. But what I can say is, we do need more smaller sites. But the input from the provincial program has served us well. We've moved dialysis across the province, but there remains work to be done.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Question for the Minister of Business. In October, the U.S. International Trade Commission upheld a Department of Commerce decision to charge a tariff on imports from Port Hawkesbury paper into the United States. Port Hawkesbury paper has indicated that an appeal will be filed under NAFTA. It is good to see the province has indicated it will offer assistance with that appeal. Can the minister update the House, respecting any needs for confidentiality, on the status of that appeal and how the government is assisting Port Hawkesbury paper?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question from my colleague. I don't have the specifics. That particular area of responsibility falls under the Minister of Energy, but I will certainly reach out and gather that information for my colleague and provide it to him.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we'll have to wait for the Minister of Energy's answer on these questions, so I will take my place.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Talking about parking lots, on Friday the Minister of Health went public with news that the Life Flight helicopter could not land on the helipad at the IWK, the QE2 and the Digby General. In making the announcement, the minister gave the impression it was Transport Canada's decision to pull the plug on these landings. However, yesterday it was reported that the Canadian helicopters made the decision to discontinue the helipad use, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the minister can explain this discrepancy.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the Life Flight, which is an important service, in 2007 was when this regulation changed. There was a grandfathering, is what I'm being told. In terms of the helicopter and the Life Flight, I think the member opposite and the former minister probably never had any discussions, perhaps even no knowledge of this regulation, as Helicopters Canada and EHS provide the service. We know that, however, Transport Canada did reach an ultimatum that April 1st the service would no longer that we were using was possible for any further. So as soon as I certainly found that out, supported the changes that needed to be made, direction given to start to look at a future Life Flight service.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
So, Mr. Speaker, Canadian Helicopter has indicated that there was 3 options to choose from in response to the Transport Canada ruling. These options including buying another helicopter, asking for an operator's exemption for Transport Canada, or mitigating the risks. I'd like to ask the minister what role did the department play in choosing any of these options, and what were the considerations that were made?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Possible made the decision that the utmost safety would be in place and that we would replace the helicopter.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Business. Mr. Speaker, on March 2010, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering made an agreement with the province of Nova Scotia to open the Trenton facility as a world-class wind tower manufacturer. June 2011, DSTN had their grand opening. DSME Trenton Limited officially announced its decision to stop operations at the Trenton facility on February 2016. My question to the Minister, would the Minister give the members of this House an update to any progress that may have occurred to secure a new tenant for this facility?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my colleague knows, and we've spoken on a number of occasions, the province was and remains a primary secured creditor. We acted quickly, Mr. Speaker, when circumstances were brought to our attention to the financial status of that facility. The receivership process has commenced, and I know there have been a significant number of those who have expressed an interest in the facility and the equipment, and each and every one of them have been referred directly to the receiver to further their interest through that process.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Trenton Works is an industrial manufacturing facility located on the banks of the East River on a 160-acre site. It is known as the first steel plant in Canada, the birthplace of the first pouring of steel in British North America in 1883, and the member from North Side Westmount keeps asking me if I was there in 1883 when they poured that steel, Mr. Speaker. But in fact, 2 members of this House worked in this facility. I had the opportunity to work there, and the Minister of Internal Services with Greenbrier, I believe, worked there for a short time. My question to the Minister, how many employees are currently working at the plant, and in what capacity during this transition between the closure in February and hopefully securing a new owner?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know there are a small group employed at the facility to ensure maintenance and operations in the sense that the facility remains warm or in idle and creates the best opportunity through the receivership process for another party to advance some business model in that particular environment.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is also for the Minister of the Business. Can the Minister of Business explain his department's 3% compliance rate with the Auditor General recommendations from 2012-2013, which is a very dismal rate of compliance, I must say, 3%?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's two components to the recommendations from the Auditor General's report as it relates to the Department of Business. There are 18 recommendations that were specific to the Jobs Fund. One of those was completed. There's 17 that the AG believes should be applied to Invest Nova Scotia. They're two different funds, Mr. Speaker, and the recommendations, until such time as the fund is active, aren't relevant to the fund, although the spirit and intent of the recommendations are being applied in Invest Nova Scotia. The 11 remaining, Mr. Speaker, recommendations that have either been transferred to other departments or Crown corporations. We've transferred those, Mr. Speaker, in the process of transferring those for follow-up.
The honourable member for Kings North.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. I would like to point out that in every case where an action is no longer considered required or appropriate, that it states in the report the Auditor General does not agree with this assessment. So that may be the Minister's assessment, but not the Auditor General's. I noticed looking at the report here that we were last year we were $7 million more was spent in the Jobs Fund than anticipated. That, to me, is a signal that there needs to be better management of what's going on in this Jobs Fund, and this is exactly what this report is addressing. Can the Minister confirm that recommendation 327 on page 65, which says third-party corroboration is needed to confirm this, these projects are occurring as intended? Can he confirm at least that that's being done?
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll give an example and just try and reinforce with my colleague.
Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now move on to opposition business. The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can you call private members' public bills for second reading?
I have to admit I missed that.
Can you call private members' public bills for second reading?
We'll now call private member public bills for second reading.
Can you call Bill 172, Psychologist Service Tax Credit Act?
We'll now call Bill number 172, the Psychologist Services Tax Credit Act. The Honourable Leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I won't ask you to say private members' public bills 3 times fast, because we've had enough trouble with that already this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, early intervention in mental health is so important. It's so key, Mr. Speaker, to